taken from the Peter Ball collection. This is the NBC and CNN coverage of the 25th anniversary of John Lennon's death. There's lots of exclusive interviews that I've never seen anywhere else with people who actually had contact with the Beatles, rather than people just talking about the Beatles.
Was dead 25 years ago tonight. We're back with more right after this. Maxwell.
All you need is love.
The people remembering John Lennon in Central Park today reminded us again that the markers in life are so often deaths.
I was on my way home from work and heard the news that he had been shot.
Lennon's death is one of those rare events freezing forever a time and place. If you're over 35, you know exactly where you were when you heard the news.
I rode the Staten Island ferry for a few hours that night.
The tears John Lennon produced in life were those of teenagers all hopped up on twisting and shouting.
All we are saying,
The tears in death
is give peace a chance.
were for the poet, the activist, the revolutionary.
He wanted us to debate the issues of the time till we got red in the face and dry in the mouth.
25 years has a way of rounding the edges. Yoko Ono, then the shrew who broke up the Beatles, now just a widow. The caption today, where did a quarter century go? Granted, John Lennon wasn't John F. Kennedy, but remember this, half the population wasn't even alive when Kennedy was shot. And for a lot of those people, this apartment building on the Upper West Side of Manhattan is their Dallas.
For a lot of the young people of today who are in their 40s or 50s, John Lennon's murder was the first tragic thing that happened in their lives.
Like JFK's death, Lennon's is shrouded in two words that will always linger. What if?
Would have you ever written with him again?
I think, it would have been quite possibly so, yeah. Because I think each of us recognized that we were good together.
So many other questions never will be.
I hope someday you join us.
And something about this day makes it all just a little harder to imagine.
And the world will live as one.
Jim Axelrod, CBS News, New York.
Tonight, a live Showbiz Tonight special event. The legacy of John Lennon in New York and across the universe. On this, the 25th anniversary of Lennon's death, Showbiz Tonight looks back, pays tribute, and explores why, all these years later, Lennon is still so revered as a musician and a man.
Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Strawberry.
In his song Imagine, John Lennon memorably sang, "Imagine all the people living life in peace." He said he might be a dreamer, but not the only one, and certainly judging by the scene here in New York City's Central Park today, he was absolutely right. Welcome to Showbiz Tonight's exclusive live coverage of the legacy of John Lennon. I am A.J. Hammer. As I mentioned, we are live in New York City Central Park at Strawberry Fields, just a few hundred feet away from where John Lennon was gunned down on December 8th, 1980, 25 years ago tonight, outside of his home, the Dakota apartment building in New York City. His wife was with him at the time, the legendary Yoko Ono. Yoko stopped by Strawberry Fields earlier today, quite unexpectedly. Nobody was sure if she was going to make an appearance. She was flanked by bodyguards and police, made her way through the crowd, didn't have anything to say, but she laid white flowers on the mosaic that reads, "Imagine," in Strawberry Fields. Of course, the memorial and tribute to the icon John Lennon going on here at Strawberry Fields, not the only one happening today. They're going on all over the world, and that's the story our David Haffenreffer has from just outside the Dakota here in New York City. David?
AJ, this whole section of New York City has been like a John Lennon shrine today. People from all over coming to hear the Dakota and across the street to Strawberry Fields to pay tribute to John Lennon and his music.
Young and old, locals and tourists all spent today in the Strawberry Fields section of Central Park. 25 years ago, people here were mourning an unforgettable tragedy. Today, it's a powerful symbol of the legacy of John Lennon, a legacy that endures more than a quarter century after his death.
John meant peace. John meant love, understanding. and compassion to all.
He was a symbol for what they believe in and a symbol for what's good in the world and what the world can be.
Over there they were singing Day Tripper, and they were singing Twist and Shout. There's no feelings of sadness here. It's really strange. It's really just kind of a feel of celebration.
New York City is the epicenter of where people are gathering to remember John Lennon on this 25th anniversary of his death. He lived here and died here in 1980. But around the world, people are also taking part in many events. In the Beatles' home country of England, fans use tributes, flowers, and prayers to celebrate the life of one of Britain's most influential sons.
Give peace a shot!
In Lennon's hometown of Liverpool, fans gathered at the Cavern Club, where the Beatles first played to remember Lennon and his influence.
John, this is for you.
Elsewhere in Liverpool, admirers sent their love skyward. They released hundreds of white balloons carrying more than 1,000 messages of tribute to Lennon. In London, Virgin megastores held a 1-minute moment of silence to remember Lennon's contribution to music. Fans inside the store stopped to think about what contributions Lennon would be making today if he were still alive.
I think that he would be involved in a lot of political processes in different ways. I think that he would be fighting for poverty in the world and for peace in the world.
Around the globe, you could find Lennon tributes today in Yoko Ono's native Japan.
Nothing's gonna change my world.
Outside of Tokyo, hundreds of fans gathered at the John Lennon Museum. This 23-year-old's parents introduced her to the Beatles. She says Lennon's music transcends language and generational differences.
Even though I can't understand English, I feel his song in my heart, and I think I can understand what he tried to convey.
Amateur musicians happily played Lennon songs. One of them says Lennon influenced his life, his hairstyle, and his love of music.
When John Lennon died, I was so shocked I could not play music for a long time after that. I was able to pick up my music only after 5 years, as I thought I must play for John Lennon's sake.
On the other side of the world, in Argentina, the Cavern Club's sister pub in Buenos Aires celebrated Lennon in its own way. The pub held a contest to find the best interpretation of Lennon's music. The winner gets a replica of Lennon's guitar. There was no shortage of Lennon fans there.
John Lennon is my maximum music idol. He was a genius musically speaking. He invented music.
He may not have invented music, but Lennon's revolutionary musical influence certainly spread throughout the world, and that world continues to remember him today.
As you can see, people around the world today remembering John Lennon in a variety of different ways. In Montreal, a group of environmental activists today remembering John Lennon by singing his music outside UN climate control talks. Yet another sign that Lennon's sense of activism remains alive and well. AJ?
David, thanks very much. Showbiz Tonight's David Hafenreffer for Outside the Dakota. I am still outside of Strawberry Fields, live in New York City. No shortage of Lennon fans here as well. Sort of a controlled chaos all day long, but thousands have been pouring in to pay tribute to this great icon. Now let's take a look at the legacy of John Lennon.
I read the news today, oh boy.
The news spread through New York City immediately. Fans gathered at Roosevelt Hospital to say goodbye to John Lennon and to come to grips with his sudden and violent death.
I will stay until the sunrise at the foot of this hospital and pray for his soul.
Many were there as his body was taken away to the morgue. News reports would later give the name of the man who killed their hero. But reports would not give a reason why Mark Chapman, the 25-year-old unemployed security guard, killed John Lennon.
The fact that he was a pacifist, that he was staunchly anti-war by the time he was killed, yeah, the irony was just unbelievable. Everything was about trying not to hurt people, and for him to be killed so brutally is just, made it all the more shocking. I'm sure a lot of his fans never have gotten over it.
Earlier that day, John and Yoko met with photographer Annie Leibovitz. They did a photo shoot for Rolling Stone magazine. They were celebrating John and Yoko's #1 record, Double Fantasy. This picture came out of that shoot.
This photo is exceptionally intimate. You're inside a couple's bedroom. You're in their bed. You're seeing what their marriage is about, and you're seeing an expression of how much he felt that he needed Yoko.
The American Society of Magazine Editors recently named this the best magazine cover of all time.
It's very hard to divorce that photograph from the circumstances. This picture is also remembered because of what happened later that evening. It's very hard to think of that photo of John and Yoko and not think, and that's when we lost you.
Without question, John Lennon gave the world some of the most memorable music of our time. He and fellow Beatle Paul McCartney are widely considered the most influential musicians of the 20th century.
What John brought to the band, obviously, was his acerbic sense of humor, his resistance. He was the one that was kind of looking at it all from afar and saying, what are we doing? Are we being packaged? What does fame mean? He was really one of the first people that understood what it meant to be famous and what it didn't mean. You know, McCartney was a fantastic showman. He was incredibly charming, incredibly cute. And between the sort of sweet and the sour, you really got what was, I think, the most successful songwriting team in history.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
It really all started with this, the Beatles' appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1964. This performance set off a mania in the United States. John and Paul wrote most of the Beatles' songs that have sold more than 250 million records over the years and inspired countless artists around the world.
Everybody was inspired by Beatles music. I think everything that came after them was clearly influenced by them.
John Lennon was 40 years old when he died. At the time, he was almost as rich as the royal family. Some estimates say his assets approached $500 million, maybe even more. But in death, Lennon continues to be big business. His estate made $22 million in 2000. What a life, absolutely worth celebrating. No surprise that the crowds have shown up here at Central Park, Strawberry Fields tonight to celebrate the life and legacy of John Lennon. And we will continue with our live exclusive coverage of the legacy of John Lennon in just a few moments. I'm going to be joined by legendary talk show host Dick Cavett. Dick was the first American interviewer to interview John Lennon after the Beatles had broken up some 35 years ago. Plus, he was a friend of John's as well. And Brooke Anderson, back warmly ensconced in the Showbiz Tonight studios. I understand you'll be speaking with a very special Beatles-related guest as well.
Oh, that's right, AJ. I'll be talking with the man who brought the Beatles to America some 40 years ago. That's coming up when Showbiz Tonight's exclusive live coverage of John Lennon's legacy continues.
Well, apart from John Lennon's immense contribution to music and poetry and lyrics and rock and roll, he was the first celebrity that took his notoriety, his celebrity, his fame, and translated it to cross the political line and do some good in the world.
Your Hammer. 25 years sounds a little better than a quarter of a century, doesn't it? But I really liked Lennon. I wasn't sure how we'd get on. They asked me to come over to their hotel room before they came on, and I went over to the St. Regis, and John put me in a movie there that he was shooting and said something I've never forgotten. He said, "You've got the only halfway intelligent show on television." And I thought, isn't that great to have a halfway intelligent show?
Well, you managed to get some good information out of John back then.
Yeah.
He made 2 memorable appearances on your show, and as I mentioned, you were the first U.S. interviewer. What a great get to get John Lennon after the Beatles had broken up.
It was a tremendous thing. I didn't realize it at the time, how great it was, and they had such a good time on the first show. The audience didn't want to leave, which I've never seen before, so we taped 30 minutes and got almost 3 shows out of them.
Well, we'd like to take a look at a couple of clips, and the first we'd like to look at an important question to have asked at the time, because everybody was pointing fingers after the breakup of the Beatles at Yoko Ono, saying she was responsible for it, and you got John's take on that. Let's take a look right now.
Okay.
Anyway, she didn't split the Beatles because how could one girl split the Beatles or one woman? You know, the Beatles were drifting apart on their own. You know.
Can you remember when you realized that it was inevitable that you would split up?
Well, no. No. It's like saying, you know, did you remember falling in love? Not quite. You know, it just sort of happens.
So how do you think history will be written about Yoko's impact on the Beatles?
Yeah, I don't know about that. She didn't seem a dragon lady to me. And I know when she met John, she was an established avant-garde artist, rather well respected, so I'm not sure about that. John made it sound a little pleasanter than the breakup was. I mean, the details are agony and horrible. Harrison woke up one day and just said, there's got to be a way to make a living not being a Beatle.
Well, you also got some great insight into why the Beatles were never destined to be one of these bands like the Rolling Stones, rocking on into their older years. Let's take a look at this clip.
Okay.
How long was it fun?
Yeah, well, everything's fun off and on, you know. So I suppose it could have gone on being fun off and on, or it could have gone worse, I don't know. It's just that when you grow up, you know, we don't want to be the crazy gang, which they might know over here, which is British, or the Marx Brothers, which is sort of being dragged on stage playing She Loves You when we've got, you know, asthma and tuberculosis, and when we're 50, you know. Here they are again, yesterday, all my love.
Were he still alive, would John Lennon still be performing? Age of 65 had he lived.
I'm not sure he would. I asked Jagger back then if he could imagine himself performing at 60, and he said easily, and he is doing it, so. It's a wonder the Beatles, any of them, survived. I mean, not to take anything off the festivity. The amount of drugs and booze and women that they consumed in a boy's dream for those years, it's a wonder that no one went the way of, you know, Janis Joplin or Hendrix. But it was fun for a long time. John said the movie makes it look like our life is fun, and it wasn't fun before the movie, and it wasn't much fun after it. And the tensions were growing in and among everybody. And I don't know that they would have lasted much longer without Yoko. Who knows? You know, she's easy to blame. And John was just so damn funny. I mean, to talk to him, he was so full of puns and anagrams and double meanings and things. He did one I haven't figured out yet.
Okay, you'll have to pass that along to me during the break. Well,
I could
certainly
do that.
To watch the two of you and the three of you with Yoko sitting there and smoking cigarettes and having a couple of drinks during your show is a wonder. And those DVDs featuring those particular shows are available in stores now. We got to wrap it up.
They went through a package of Viceroys in, I think, 48 seconds, and then they calmed down. But they were so bloody nervous, I couldn't imagine why.
Dick Cavett, thanks for joining us tonight here in Central Park at Strawberry Fields on this amazing day.
I like you, and it's a goddamn shame that he's dead.
It is. But we will continue to celebrate his legacy. Our exclusive coverage will continue in just moments on Showbiz Tonight. I'm going to be speaking with a guy who actually got to fly around on a plane with them during the Beatles' very first tour of the United States. He has quite a few stories to tell. That's coming up in a few moments. Brooke?
AJ, it's also a poignant night for Beatles fans in more ways than one. Tonight, Paul McCartney has earned some Grammy nominations, and I'll have more on that when Showbiz Tonight's exclusive live coverage of John Lennon's legacy continues.
It was interesting. The other night I was watching, I believe it was the making of Imagine, and it was so interesting just to see how, you know, so many different sides of this incredible man. And so, you know, he's had an enormous impact on music that we can't even express with words. So I'm happy that, you know, we'll all be celebrating his life.
In addition to being the 25th anniversary of his songwriting partner and bandmate John Lennon's death, today McCartney was nominated for 2 Grammys. The 48th annual Grammy Award nominees were announced here in New York this morning. McCartney's Chaos and Creation in the Backyard picked up nominations for Album of the Year and Pop Vocal Album. Other big nominees this year, Mariah Carey, John Legend, and Kanye West each got 8 nominations. The Grammys will be handed out February 8th. Okay, everybody, stay where you are, because coming up, we are joined live by the man who brought the Beatles to America. It's very, very exciting. AJ, we're going to go back to you standing by at Strawberry Fields here in New York.
And the guy you're going to talk to, what a great storyteller. I'll be speaking with a guy who actually got to travel with the Beatles. And we know John was a musician, a poet, a writer, a legend, but a weatherman. We'll get that story, too, as our continuing live exclusive coverage of John Lennon's legacy.
80. John Lennon and his wife, Yoko Ono, are returning from an evening recording session to their home at the Dakota Building on New York's Upper West Side. As he steps out of his limousine, Lennon is greeted by a gunman posing as an autograph-seeking fan. 25-year-old Mark David Chapman opens fire. 4 bullets hit Lennon. Minutes later, Lennon is pronounced dead, and the world begins to mourn a music legend. Singer, songwriter, pacifist, Beatle. Lennon's career won him legions of followers, and it was partly his quest for adulation that first led Lennon to music. The released special edition DVD of the movie Imagine, John Lennon includes rare footage of Lennon talking about his life.
My father and my mother split when I was about 4.
As well as recording.
How can I go forward when I...
Many call Lennon's music the soundtrack to a generation, but critics say his solo work was uneven.
It was pretty hit and miss until the very final album released just a few weeks before his death.
Lennon's death came just as his double fantasy album was rising up the charts. In an October interview with CNN, Yoko Ono discussed continuing her late husband's legacy through a grant she created to honor peace activists.
This is the type of thing that John would have approved, and he would have loved to see happen. And I thought it was very important that this award is created.
Perhaps Lennon's greatest legacy is his influence on future generations of musicians.
I wanted our first demos for our first album. I was sending them to John Lennon to produce our first album. He invented U2.
The lyrics to John Lennon's Imagine perhaps resonating now more than ever.
Living life in peace.
That was Showbiz Tonight's Sabila Vargas. Well, certainly it's the fans that have kept the legacy of John Lennon alive. Literally, they have come out in the thousands this year to commemorate the man on the 25th anniversary of his death. This is Fred from New York City. Fred, you say you haven't been able to come back before tonight because it's been too painful.
Yeah, I've just never been able to do it, and today I was drawn here for some reason.
And the impact that John Lennon's music and life has had on your life?
That's the reason why I started playing music. I still remember Ed Sullivan's show when I was 4 years old.
Well, so many Americans certainly venture to London and England and to go by the famed Abbey Road studios where the Beatles recorded to try to feel a piece of that. We have Londoners joining us here in New York City. The Woods family, what brought you out?
My daughter Perry here is a real big fan of John Lennon, and I thought I owed it to her to come down and have a look at what was going on here tonight.
And are you guys inspired tonight? I see the peace sign on your face.
Yeah, I've kind of discovered him last year, and ever since then I wanted to come down here.
Well, you guys are the ones who will keep the legacy alive through the generations. Can you imagine being a fan of John Lennon? The year is 1964, and you have the opportunity to get on a plane and travel with the Beatles on their first North American tour. That was the case for my next guest. I had the opportunity to sit down with Larry Kane earlier today, who had that very opportunity to see what it was like the first time he met John Lennon. So, Larry, so you were 21 years old when you first met
I was a baby.
John Lennon.
I was a young radio news director.
When you got the assignment and you had to go spend this difficult time with them on the airplane, what was your first impression of John Lennon when you met him?
I thought he was a little brash and a little arrogant, but I knew right away when he walked into a room that he had you. He was a very charismatic man. He made eye contact with you. Reminded me of Bill Clinton in some ways. He made eye contact with you. He chatted with you. He looked at you. He talked to you. He had found out that my mother died that summer, and he heard from one of the other reporters on the tour that I was talking about. He came over to me, wanted to see if I was okay. Very thoughtful person, smoked a lot, regular cigarettes at that time, and drank a lot on the plane. Because, you learn a lot about a person when you're confined to a 94-seat airplane flying across the country. He threw ice cubes down my back and mashed potatoes on my forehead. And it was very nice to travel with him, what can I say?
And the beginning of a wonderful working relationship, as well as a terrific friendship. And if you fast forward several years later, he shows up in Philadelphia, where you were anchoring the news one weekend, to do what? What goes on here? And I believe we have a little footage of this.
It was a radio marathon, and basically what happened was the part of the charity was multiple sclerosis, which is the disease that really did my mother in. And he knew about that. I called him up along with the record promoter. He came down all by himself on a train. There you see, he was in the studio doing the weather for us, which he volunteered to do that night. Thank goodness.
Looking smashing as well.
Thank goodness that the weather was clear and sunny, because it was meteorologically it was not a fantastic weather forecast. The only time that John Lennon did the weather, that is me shaking hands with him there. That is me, if you can believe that. the wide ties and the double-breasted suits and the seersucker and everything. But he had a great time, and he really enjoyed doing the weather there. He had a wonderful time. He met, in his words, he met about 2,000 people that weekend in the flesh. And he loved meeting people. Let me tell you something. There was nothing more important to him than meeting real people. He hated the celebrity mix.
That was the point for him. It was that real-life experience.
He wanted, I mean, a great day to him, according to Yoko or May Pang or any of the people he knew, was sitting in a coffee shop, maybe reading the New York Times, watching the people go by, and melding himself into the vast population of New York City. And he loved New York.
In your book, you help us to get to know the real John Lennon, the man, not just the celebrity, not just the musician. What's one thing that people wouldn't know about John that would just make him go, wow?
I think they would be very surprised at how insecure he was and his lack of self-esteem. This is a guy who did not have a father to speak of, a mother who disappeared, an aunt who was a disciplinarian, a very close friend who died at a young age, a failed first marriage. And throughout his life, even during the height of Beatlemania, when they were so successful in the early days before the rush, before we knew they were the Beatles, quote, end quote, John Lennon had a poor self-esteem. And he told us that in his music. I'm a loser. I'm not what I appear to be. Help, I need somebody. Mother, you had me, but I didn't have you. And then later in his life, that wonderful, wonderful song, Just Like Starting Over, which was his point of coming back. And the song he wrote for Yoko, Woman, which was after all he learned about life. And the song he wrote for May Pang, Number 9 Dream. They're all songs about where he was at that point in his life. So he had a poor self-esteem, even though he exuded confidence.
So many great stories from Larry Kane, and for more, check out his book called Lennon Revealed. It's available in stores now. Well, a rousing chorus of All You Need Is Love is going on behind me in Strawberry Fields here in Central Park as the tribute to John Lennon continues. How are they celebrating John Lennon's life over in London? We'll go there to find out coming up after the break. And Brooke, I understand you have another terrific Beatles-oriented guest.
Indeed, I do, AJ. I'll be speaking with the man who booked the Beatles into one of their most famous U.S. concerts ever. Showbiz Tonight's exclusive live coverage of John Lennon's legacy continues in just a moment.
He was a great mind, a lovely soul, and, you know, we are in very unpeaceful times right now, so it seems very relevant to notice the people that made that a priority.
Of a life. And I can say his music was a big part of my life, and we miss John Lennon.
Welcome back to Showbiz Tonight's exclusive live coverage of the legacy of John Lennon from New York City Central Park in Strawberry Fields. I'm AJ Hammer, and throughout the show, we've been showing you how America has been remembering John today with tributes going on all over the nation in the country that he called his home at the end of his life. But how is he being remembered in his native land of England? Let's go to CNN's Richard Quest for Showbiz Tonight.
A 1-minute round of applause in memory of John Lennon was considered to be one of the more fitting ways to remember the anniversary of his murder outside the Abbey Road studios here in London. It was, of course, here that Lennon and the Beatles recorded their most famous hits, and it is here that every year thousands of people still come to pay their respects. It was a tradition started after the death of Lennon to write on the wall. The wall has to be repainted several times a year because so many people write messages. Today's writings were all about John Lennon and the tragedy of his death. Vicky Lawrence remembers seeing Lennon and the Beatles. Today had to be remembered.
Well, just to remember him, remember his music, remember his legacy, and remember my childhood probably. But I've been a Beatles fan throughout my life, ever since I was before a teenager. So I've been a fan all my life.
There were various other moments of commemoration. At the Virgin Megastore in London, there was a minute's silence in memory of John Lennon. It's the first time the store has held such an event for any artist. And then in Liverpool, John Lennon's home city, there were numerous events to remember the murdered singer. John, this is for you. It may be 35 years since the Beatles broke up, but even now, Liverpool still makes much of its Fab Four heritage.
You
imagine there's no heaven.
This weekend, the British Broadcasting Corporation will air a special documentary called One Night in December, where Sir Paul McCartney recalls what a terrible shock it was when he heard of Lennon's death. And on BBC Radio tonight, there was a special concert from the Abbey Road Studios, where today's artists recreated some of the Beatles' hits. Like Liverpool, Abbey Road Studios will always be one of those places associated with John Lennon and the Beatles. And although the number of people turning up today was perhaps on the small side, the most telling point is that some of those who arrived weren't even born when John Lennon died.
CNN's Richard Quest for Showbiz Tonight in London. We go from London now to New York City Central Park, where I'm live at Strawberry Fields as John Lennon's life is celebrated today, to the Showbiz Tonight studios, where Brooke Anderson is standing by with a guest whose importance in the role and in the life the Beatles played in America should not be understated.
Absolutely not, AJ. A very special guest tonight, Sid Bernstein, the man who brought the Beatles to America. He joins us live. Now, he's hands down one of the most influential music promoters of the 20th century. He actually booked the Beatles in New York's Shea Stadium for the very first time back in 1965. And Sid is here with us now. Sid, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
I'm happy to be here.
Oh, we're happy to have you. Let me ask you this.
You've got a great bunch of guys on your staff.
I do, don't I? We've got a great
and the
crew
ladies
here.
are lovely. Wow.
Absolutely.
I was feeling quite nervous, but now I don't. I feel like I'm almost at home.
We want to put you at ease.
Thank you.
That's what we want to do.
Thank you.
What do you reflect on today, 25 years after John Lennon died? Did you do anything special today to remember him?
Did I do anything special today? All I did was think about him. One, I was having dinner on the street where he was taken away from us.
Today you did?
25 years ago, yeah.
Brought back memories, I'm sure, of that time, possibly.
So passing that street, coming here to your studio, and the phone calls today, and the other TV shows, and all day long, how do you forget that man?
You can't.
He's endless.
Let's go back, Sid, to 1965, when you brought the Beatles to America. When did you hear about them, first of all, this group from London, and when did you think, I've got to get these guys to the U.S.?
I was first, because when I was a soldier, and spending some time in England before we spent time in tougher places than that, I got into the habit of reading English newspapers. And when I got home in one piece, thankfully, my habit of reading English newspapers stayed with me. And so I read about these four kids from Liverpool before, as his manager told me, you're the first American to call me. And that call came in, I later found out, even before Ed Sullivan's. And when he found out I had them, he booked them 3 days before I had them at Carnegie Hall on July 12, 1964. Automatically, a year later, or with some sort of wisdom I wish that I still had, I booked them at Shea Stadium the following year.
Arguably one of the biggest concerts ever.
And that was in 65.
And you know what, Sid? The rest is incredible history. They were thrust into a surreal life almost, pandemonium. How did John Lennon deal with that?
He dealt with it. He was the same guy the day I met him when he got off the plane at JFK, and I met him at his hotel, and his manager, Brian Epstein, introduced me to him, and the other three boys, George, Ringo, and Paul, whom I saw a few days ago, by the way. And he was just an unforgettable guy. And there was something so special about him that until this day, the fact that I met him some 41 years ago still keeps me alive and functioning and meeting new people like you, your cameraman, your sound man.
And I know that people even shook your hand because they knew you had shaken his hand.
Yeah,
So
I still meet people who said, have you washed your hand? I want to shake the hand that shook John's hand. Have you? I said, yes. In 41 years, I've washed my hands a few times.
And they shook
used
your
to
hand,
gather-
and then I wonder how long before they didn't wash their hands.
People used to gather in front of my building on 12th Street in the Village.
And just wait.
And
I
wait
know.
to shake the hand that shook the hand.
Well,
of
Sid,
John.
you made quite a mark bringing them to America, and we appreciate your being here with us tonight. Sid Bernstein, thank you so much. Showbiz Tonight's exclusive live coverage of the legacy of John Lennon continues after this break.
When you write a song like Imagine, I mean, come on, it's going to be there forever.
Forever.
For
Live on
1,000 years, forever. As long as there's people on this planet.
Nothing you can make that can't be made. No one you can save that can't be saved. Nothing you can do, but you can learn how to be you in time. It's easy.
Hi there, I'm Sophia Choi, and here's your Headline Prime News Break. We're looking at live pictures now of a vigil in the Strawberry Fields section of Central Park to honor the late John Lennon. 25 years ago tonight, the legendary singer, songwriter, and peace activist was murdered in front of his New York apartment. Earlier, his wife Yoko Ono, a bouquet of flowers on a mosaic in the park called Imagine.
Thank you for watching Cleveland Live Music. I can't play a lick. That's why I'm a taper. Thanks for watching the channel and making it grow. If you want to subscribe, that'd be appreciated. Patreon and GoFundMe would be appreciated. Maybe I could get guitar lessons.